Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I'm going to touch today on a subject that has created some confusion for certain people. I sometimes see in various different comments, etc., situations where people don't understand the concept of citizenship by exception. So I'm going to explain to you all about citizenship by exception today, what it is, where it applies, where it doesn't apply, contrasting it with, what might be called, citizenship by corruption or something, which is another side of things, and so give you a little bit of background on that, which is quite interesting because it's one of these things that is not necessarily available in all situations. So before we talk about that, if you haven't already, please smash the subscribe button, hit the all notifications, make sure you don't miss out on any of our future videos. If you're interested in help with getting a second citizenship, official, unofficial programs, residencies, what the solution is that's best for you, where to relocate, other residency options, forming companies, opening bank accounts, international tax optimization, asset protection, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so what is the concept of citizenship by exception? So we sometimes, or at least I will sometimes, refer to citizenship by exception programs as citizenship by investment programs. Technically, there is a difference, but in a practical sense, as it might apply to a general person, there's often not that much difference. So the real difference comes in the legal basis. Okay, so when you're reading through the laws of various different countries, they'll have the ways by which somebody can become a citizen: by birth, by descent, by naturalization. Sometimes there's an investment path. Sometimes there's various different changes based on marriage, for example, a faster process, etc. And then there is the possibility of what we sometimes call exceptions, usually not actually called exception, although it could be, depends on the country's laws. And essentially what this is that some particular party within the government has the legal power to grant citizenship to someone in cases where they believe it is in the best interest of the country. Now, sometimes this process needs to go through a citizenship committee. Sometimes it's through the office of a particular high-ranking government official, usually the president or vice president's office, etc. But it varies case by case. And this actually happens a lot more than you're probably aware of. It doesn't really get publicized that much, but there's lots of, if you kind of dig into it, you'll see it fairly often. And a good example of this is for athletes. So I have a good friend who was an Olympic athlete, and actually had ancestry in Bahamas, but they wanted him he was also Canadian, so he actually didn't have his Bahamian nationality at the time, even though one of his parents was from Bahamas. And when they wanted him to compete, they realized last minute that, he doesn't have the citizenship, and they rushed it through, and all sorts of things happened. Now, that's not technically by exception, but it is actually quite common that someone who is an Olympic level athlete could get citizenship. And there's lots of other examples, right? They may do it for actors, for artists, for scientists, for various others. And one could be people who make some sort of a contribution to the country, which could be financial. So what that ultimately means is that in certain cases, with the combination of the right resources and the right connections, a person can sometimes get citizenship. So we've seen this in a variety of different countries. It's not that uncommon. What's uncommon is having the connections for it. There's lots of talk that gets circulated around the internet sometimes about the ability to do this in Austria. I personally don't have connections in Austria to do that. They say that, for several million euros, you can get Austrian citizenship. And, can you? I don't know. I definitely have facilitated the process for people in certain other countries. And usually that's mostly financial. So you make some sort of a contribution. Maybe it's, to the medical system, to hospitals, to something like this, to some sort of foundation, to sometimes it goes into, general contribution to the country, etc. It varies. And sometimes they're not really that open about what happens to it. They simply say, hey, listen, here's the deal. If a person's willing to make a significant contribution to the country, this will happen. Sometimes it can be if you create sufficient jobs in the country. Sometimes this is a good deal, sometimes it's a terrible deal. For example, you can get this in some place like Serbia. but it's a bad deal in Serbia in all my experiences with it anyway. There's other cases where, it's negotiable if the person has a background which is really interesting in some way, shape, or form. In my experience, you don't usually get that much negotiating power. Like, you have to be pretty significant in terms of your background. You can't be like, oh, I'm a pretty high-level tennis player. It's like, unless you're like medal potential, it's probably not going to happen in that regard. But there are definitely cases where that happens. I've done business with people who have facilitated it for various athletes, etc. And it's usually for countries that are smaller. I haven't heard of this happening typically with something like the United States or Australia or something like that. But I would imagine that, in a variety of cases with even some more significant countries, that if there was some reason that they could really make that case and they said, hey, listen, here's the reason why this should happen, that could be the case. So anyway, what you'll find is if you look up a program like this, you're not going to be able to, go and Google like citizenship by investment in that country. There won't be some information on it because technically there's not a citizenship by investment. What you'll have instead is it's a citizenship granted by exception through something. Now, I mentioned citizenship by corruption. Citizenship by corruption is kind of another thing. In some countries, and actually some countries where you still can get it by exception, there are some cases where, people within government or within wherever are willing to orchestrate the documents for you to get something to happen. So I've seen that happen, or certainly heard of that happening a lot in Africa as a simple example. I have some friends who once told me like, hey, no big deal. People can just make it happen for quite little money. Interestingly, unfortunately, a bunch of those cases, there'll be restrictions on, say, having dual citizenship, which is, it's bizarre. We're willing to facilitate this, but this is a problem. Another good example is in Bulgaria. For quite some time, you could get citizenship for like 5,000 euros. This was for years and years until, 7-8 years ago, something like that. And so I didn't know about it at the time. If I had, that would have been great. A person could have flown over there, and you can go and read the news stories. They were putting out like 200 citizenships a month or something like that. In the end, the people working in the immigration office got arrested, but almost nobody lost their citizenship, which is kind of interesting. So that's the only case that I know of where actually somebody lost their citizenship was a fairly well-known Russian oligarch who was a known criminal, and it violated the rules because legally a criminal wasn't allowed to be granted the citizenship, and so they withdrew it from that person. So kind of interesting how some of those things happen. Generally, the tell in that is, in my experience, citizenship by exception will not be an insubstantial contribution. Like, it's going to be at least as much as or similar to what you're used to thinking about as a citizenship by investment. And, if somebody's coming and telling you, hey, listen, it's like $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, like, that's pretty much certainly some sort of corruption. Doesn't mean you won't get a valid passport. You might, but corruption, not citizenship by exception. And you can think of that fairly logically, right? It's just, how much is it worth it for a country to give away their citizenship? We kind of know the market rates based on what citizenship or investment programs are out there officially. So anyway, I hope that helps, gives you a little bit of background on what the environment is. And, if you're somebody who either has the financial means or you're in a situation where, you have some very exceptional abilities or asset of some sort that the country would want you, it's in theory an option. Like I said, I find in practice, you really need to have the connections in combination with those things in order to facilitate it. But, in the right cases, it can happen. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Follow me on Twitter @MichaelRosmer. Give the video a thumbs up, really helps us out. Share it with your friends. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.